Welcome to 21st Century Dating Decoded. We're making modern love simple. Get ready to decode your love life. Brought to you by Mingle.
Imagine waking up, right? It's a Saturday morning, you roll over, grab your phone off the nightstand, and you're squinting at the screen. You open your banking app to just kind of check the damage from your Friday night first date.
The dreaded morning after banking check. It's terrifying.
It really is, because you mentally calculate what you consumed, right? You think, okay, 2 craft cocktails, maybe a shared appetizer, and a coffee afterwards. So you're expecting a pretty reasonable hit to your checking account.
Right. Just a standard evening out.
Exactly. But then the number loads and you just freeze.
Yeah.
Staring back at you is this figure that makes it look like you just financed a small weekend getaway, or, I don't know, bought a very depreciated used car.
Yeah, you're just sitting there genuinely bewildered, wondering where on earth that money actually went.
Yes. And if you have experienced that exact moment of financial vertigo recently, you are absolutely not alone.
Not even slightly alone. I mean, we are currently witnessing this massive, just fundamental shift in the underlying economics of human connection. Hi, I'm Zach.
And I'm Alice. Welcome to our deep dive on 21st Century Dating Decoded.
So glad you're here with us.
Today, our mission is to explore this fascinating and, frankly, slightly terrifying stack of financial reports, sociological studies, and relationship surveys.
It's a heavy stack, too.
It really is. We are going to figure out how inflation, broader economic instability, and shifting cultural expectations are completely altering the way we date, how we choose our mates, and ultimately how we approach marriage.
Yeah, we're basically looking at this very real phenomenon that people are calling dateflation.
Dateflation, which is it's such a bleak term.
It is, but it captures it perfectly. We're also getting into the incredibly explicit financial demands we are now placing on potential partners and the specific calculated dollar amount that society has somehow associated with the privilege of finding true love.
Which is wild to think about, a literal dollar amount on true love.
I know. But to truly grasp the scale of what we are dealing with, we kind of have to start with the macroeconomics of a simple first date.
Right. Let's look at the actual numbers.
Because the numbers we pulled from recent financial indices are honestly staggering. I mean, think about the friction you feel at the grocery store right now.
It's awful.
Right. You put a dozen eggs, a gallon of milk, and a loaf of bread into your cart, and it feels like you're handing over a small fortune at the register.
Yeah, you need a payment plan for breakfast.
Exactly. But what happens when that exact same incredibly heavy inflationary pressure gets applied to your Friday night social life?
It completely implodes.
It does. According to the BMO Real Financial Progress Index, this concept of dateflation is no longer just a catchy hashtag or some internet meme. It has become a measurable, incredibly heavy economic burden for singles.
So what are we actually looking at cost-wise?
Well, the data shows that the average all-in cost of single date in America has now reached $189.
Wait, $189 for one date?
For one single date.
Yeah.
And that represents a 12.5% increase from the year 2025 alone. Yeah. And if we look at the annual aggregate, Americans spent an average of $2,323 on dates over the course of a single year.
That is the real story there is hidden in the comparison between standard inflation and this specific dating inflation, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because a 12.5% jump in the cost of just going out with someone is massive, especially when you hold it up against the broader consumer price index for roughly the same period.
Right, because the CPI wasn't anywhere near that.
No, the CPI only rose by 3.8%.
Right.
So that tells us that dating expenses are vastly outpacing the general everyday cost of living. But to understand why, I think we really have to deconstruct that phrase, the all-in cost.
Yeah, it's doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It is, because that $189 average is not just the dinner bill. We are talking about an entire ecosystem of hidden logistical costs that you incur before you even sit down across from someone.
Exactly. I mean, you have to factor in the transportation infrastructure, for starters.
Which is not cheap.
Not at all. You aren't just paying for gas. You are paying for parking downtown. Or, and this is a big one, you're dealing with rideshare algorithms that artificially surge the pricing the literal moment everyone decides to go out at 7 in the evening.
The surge pricing will destroy your budget before you even leave your house.
Right. Then you have the actual entertainment, the inflated cost of a single cocktail, the mandatory 20+% tip, the local taxes. But the most insidious part of this calculation is what behavioral economists are starting to label the grooming tax.
The grooming tax. That is the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Because getting ready for a date, particularly a first date where you are trying to make a lasting impression, that is a highly capitalized event.
You're not just throwing on sweatpants.
No, you aren't just rolling out of bed. You are getting a fresh haircut. You might be buying a new outfit because your wardrobe feels stale. There are cosmetics, high-end skincare, salon appointments. None of that is free. It honestly reminds me entirely of the hidden fee structure on a budget airline.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Right. Like you see a promotional banner for a flight that costs $39 and you think, wow, I've gamed the system.
I'm a genius.
Exactly. But the moment you try to actually use that ticket, the reality sets in. They charge you $40 to pick a seat so you aren't wedged against the bathroom.
Yep.
They charge you $60 just to bring a carry-on bag with your clothes. They charge you for the stale sandwich and the tiny bottle of water.
And suddenly your cheap flight is what, like $300?
Exactly. Suddenly your supposedly cheap flight costs $250. Modern dating operates on that exact same deceptive psychological principle.
That makes total sense.
You swipe right, you agree to meet for a casual coffee or a single drink, and you think it's a low-stakes, low-cost endeavor.
Just grabbing a quick trick.
Right. But the true all-in cost of preparing yourself, transporting yourself to the venue, presenting yourself as a viable romantic option, and then getting back home safely, it completely drains your account.
It really does. And the psychological toll of these compounding, often completely invisible costs is becoming incredibly severe.
I can imagine. It's exhausting.
It is. The BMO survey revealed that nearly half of all singles, 47% to be precise, now state on the record that dating simply isn't financially worth it anymore.
Almost half.
Almost half. They're basically saying the perceived return on investment is no longer justifying the initial required capital outlay.
That is wild.
But to fully understand the gravity of that 47% opting out, we kind of had to look past the immediate out-of-pocket expense and examine the opportunity cost.
Right. What they could be doing with that money instead.
Exactly. We reviewed some really interesting data from Mercury that highlights exactly what younger demographics are sacrificing just to afford this price of love.
Because that $2,300 a year doesn't just disappear into a vacuum.
No, it doesn't.
Every dollar spent on a mediocre date is a dollar that cannot be deployed elsewhere in your life.
Exactly. Think about the time value of money.
Okay.
If you take that $2,300 annual spend money that was essentially burned on small talk and overpriced appetizers, and you redirect it into a standard conservative wealth-building vehicle.
Right, like an index fund or something?
Yeah, so you put it into an S&P 500 index fund, or even just a standard risk-free 5% high-yield savings account.
Which are pretty accessible right now.
Yeah, very accessible. If you do that consistently over the course of 5, 8, or 10 years, you aren't just looking at a little bit of extra spending money. You are looking at a massive compounded sum.
You're talking about real life-changing money.
Yes, you are looking at the foundational down payment on a first home. You are looking at a critical, life-altering early contribution to a retirement portfolio that could literally shave years off your working life.
Wow, when you put it like that.
Right. Because of the aggressive nature of dateflation, younger generations are essentially being forced to sacrifice their long-term wealth-building milestones just for the basic human right of participating in the dating market.
That is so deeply unfair.
They are actively trading compound interest for the mere chance at a romantic connection.
When you frame it as a literal trade-off between finding a partner and buying a home, it completely recontextualizes how people are navigating this landscape.
It changes everything.
Because if a single date requires a major financial calculation, and the opportunity cost is your future financial security, how are daters modifying their actual on-the-ground behavior to avoid going completely bankrupt?
Well, the result is a massive structural bifurcation in social behavior.
A bifurcation, meaning they're splitting into extremes.
Exactly. We are witnessing the emergence of what economists would call a K-shaped dating economy.
Okay, K-shaped, like the economic recovery model.
Exactly like that. You know, you are probably familiar with a K-shaped economic recovery. It's a term we heard constantly after the 2020 pandemic.
Right, where some people do great and others just tank.
Right. In a K-shaped recovery, the wealthy asset-holding class recovers incredibly quickly and trends upward, forming the top arm of the letter K. Meanwhile, lower-income demographics, the working class, continue to struggle, lose purchasing power, and trend downward, forming the bottom arm of the K.
Okay, I follow.
Well, that exact same stark, divergent reality is now mapping perfectly onto human romance.
So how does that actually look in dating? Let's walk through the demographics of those two arms because the contrast is stark.
Yeah, let's look at the bottom first. At the very bottom arm of this K-shaped dating economy, we have 14% of the American dating population engaging in a new behavior termed afore-dating.
Afore-dating, like affordable dating.
Exactly. And this demographic is spending literally $0 on dates.
Zero, as in nothing at all.
Nothing. $0. They have entirely opted out of the transactional dating economy. They're exclusively choosing free activities, a walk in a local park, a hike on a public trail, or, a picnic where they bring Tupperware filled with food they already bought during their regular grocery run.
Right, utilizing sunk costs.
Exactly. They have completely, surgically removed the traditional dining, drinking, and entertainment budgets from the romantic equation.
Okay, so that's the bottom of the K. What about the top?
So if you look at the top arm of the K, you find another 14% of the population who have taken the exact opposite approach.
Meaning they're just spending wildly.
Pretty much. They have simply accepted that modern dating is an exorbitant luxury good. They are spending $300 or more per single date.
$300 for a single evening out with someone you might never speak to again.
Exactly. $300 to figure out if you even like the person.
That's mind-boggling.
And the generational divide driving this top arm is sharp. Gen Z and millennials saw the absolute largest spike in dating expenditure.
Really? I would have thought older generations with more wealth?
Nope. Millennials specifically have pushed their average spend up to $252 per date, which represents a massive 32% jump from 2025.
32%.
Yeah. But because these costs at the top are so prohibitive, the overall frequency of human connection is falling.
That makes sense. You can't sustain that.
Right. The data shows that the average number of dates per year for actively dating individuals has dropped from 14 in 2025 down to just 12 in 2026.
So they're going on one date a month?
Essentially, yes. People are leaving their houses less frequently, and when they do finally go out, they're either liquidating a small fortune to impress someone, or they're spending absolutely nothing at all.
Wow. We really need to pause and examine the bottom arm of that K, this concept of afore dating, because I see a massive flaw in treating it as a purely pragmatic solution.
Okay, what's the flaw?
Well, on paper, suggesting a walk in the park or meeting up at a free public museum sounds incredibly financially smart. It protects your downside risk.
Right, you don't lose any money if it's a bad date.
Exactly. But we do not conduct our romantic lives in a vacuum. We live in a world that is heavily, almost toxically influenced by social media algorithms.
Absolutely.
And social media constantly broadcasts the narrative that cheap dates are a blaring red flag.
Yeah, they really do.
If you spend 5 minutes on TikTok or Instagram, you'll find thousands of videos pushing the idea that if a person only offers a $0 date, it is a definitive signal of their low worth.
If he wanted to, he would. Right, that whole trend.
Yes. It is framed as a lack of serious interest, a lack of resources, or fundamentally, a lack of respect for the other person's time.
Yeah, it's just universally branded as low effort.
Right. So the real question isn't whether a free hike saves you money. The question is whether you can actually afford the social penalty of being frugal.
That's a huge point.
Are people effectively self-sabotaging their romantic prospects before they even meet just to save $100?
That tension points to a profoundly important mechanism in evolutionary biology and economics known as costly signaling.
Costly signaling. Okay, break that down for me.
To understand why a $0 date feels offensive to some people, you have to look at the peacock.
The bird.
The bird, yeah. A male peacock grows an enormous, heavy, incredibly vibrant tail. Yep. Now, from a pure survival standpoint, that tail is a disaster.
Because it makes them easy to catch.
Exactly. It requires massive amounts of caloric energy to grow. It makes the bird much slower, and it acts as a giant neon sign for predators.
Right. Here I am. Eat me.
Basically.
Yeah.
But that is exactly the point. The tail is a costly signal. The peacock is effectively advertising to the female, look at how strong, healthy, and genetically superior I am. I can carry around this massive handicap and still survive.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So for decades in human society, the expensive white tablecloth dinner date served as our version of the peacock's tail.
That makes perfect sense.
Right. It was a costly financial signal of a person's viability, their excess resources, and their willingness to invest those resources into a potential partner.
Wow. So when you strip that costly signal away
Yes.
and instead suggest a $0 walk around the reservoir, you're removing the traditional metric of viability.
Precisely. And the immense social risk is exactly what you just described.
Yeah.
The other person's brain does not interpret this as savvy financial prudence in a high inflation environment.
No, they interpret it as an insult.
Right. Their brain interprets it as cheapness, inability to provide, or total disinterest.
Which perfectly encapsulates the modern dating trap. People are caught in this brutal tug of war between wanting to be financially responsible so they can actually afford to live and needing to execute a costly signal to impress a potential partner.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. And the fallout from this tension is that daters have stopped guessing. They have stopped relying on subtle signals.
Yeah, the subtlety is completely gone.
It really is. Instead, they are simply placing new, highly explicit, unapologetic financial expectations on each other before they even agree to swipe right.
They really are.
They are literally putting a hard, standardized dollar amount on what it takes to even be considered a viable human partner.
And thanks to a joint survey conducted by Talker Research and the consumer finance app Current, we know the exact specific dollar amount of that expectation.
The magic number.
The magic number. According to the data, the average American now firmly believes that a minimum annual salary of $106,417 is required to find true love.
Over $106,000.
Yep.
That is the baseline. That is the entry fee just to be considered eligible for the concept of true love.
It is effectively a six-figure paywall to enter the serious relationship market.
A six-figure paywall. That excludes so many people.
It excludes the vast majority of people, and what is incredibly telling is how this expectation breaks down across generations. While the baby boomers were the only demographic surveyed that averaged an expectation under the six-figure mark.
Really? The boomers are the least financially demanding.
In this context, yes.
Yes.
Every single other demographic, Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z, firmly believes that you must be earning over $100,000 a year to be a viable partner.
Okay, rather than dismissing this as a generation of shallow, hyper-materialistic people, because I know that's the easy conclusion to jump to.
It is the easy conclusion, yeah.
We really need to view this through the lens of what relationship experts are now calling pragmatic foundationalism.
Pragmatic foundationalism.
Right. Think about how radically the social etiquette has shifted. 5 or 10 years ago, financial vetting was incredibly taboo.
Oh, yeah. You never talked about money.
Never. You would never ask someone what their salary was on a first date or a third date or even a fifth date. It was considered crass, rude, and entirely unromantic.
It was a huge faux pas.
But today, overt financial vetting is viewed as a necessary modern survival strategy. The world has become hostile.
It really has.
Housing is fundamentally unaffordable in most major metropolitan areas. Groceries require financing, as we joked about earlier, and inflation is silently eating away at everyone's purchasing power.
Right.
So people are asking for $100,000 because they want a summer in the Hamptons. They're asking for it because that is what it costs to simply not drown.
Exactly. We are witnessing the death of romantic idealism.
Exactly.
The centuries-old narrative that love conquers all, including poverty and struggle, is being replaced by a highly pragmatic, almost clinical view of partnership as an economic unit.
An economic unit? It sounds so cold.
It does sound cold, but we have fascinating longitudinal data from SciPost that adds a crucial layer of nuance to this six-figure expectation.
Okay, what did SciPost find?
So they didn't just ask people what they wanted in a survey.
Mm-hmm.
They analyzed data spanning over a decade from the German Family Panel, which tracks thousands of singles over time, and they compared those findings to robust U.S. samples.
Okay, so it's behavior over time, not just self-reported ideals?
Exactly. And what the researchers discovered is that a person's absolute current baseline income matters significantly more than any recent short-term changes or trajectories in their income when it comes to their internal readiness to date.
Wait, we need to unpack the psychology of that, because the distinction between absolute income and relative trajectory is vital.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
The methodology of a panel study like the German Family Panel is key here because they track the exact same individuals year after year. They can see exactly how changes in life circumstances trigger changes in behavior.
Okay.
So what they found means that if someone recently landed a massive promotion, say 15% raise, but their overall absolute salary is still relatively low.
Like what kind of low?
Like maybe they went from $40,000 to $46,000.
Okay, yeah. That's a nice bump, but still tough to live on.
Right. They do not suddenly feel a surge of dating confidence. The positive trajectory doesn't actually matter to them psychologically.
Oh, that's interesting. So just making progress isn't enough.
No. Conversely, if someone took a slight pay cut, or maybe a bonus didn't come through, but their baseline absolute salary is still very high.
Like they dropped from 150,000 to 140,000.
Exactly. In that scenario, their dating confidence and readiness remain entirely intact.
Wow.
What dictates human behavior is the absolute floor of your financial stability, not the recent upward or downward slope of your career.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, the researchers found that people with higher current absolute incomes reported a significantly greater desire for a romantic relationship, much stronger feelings of readiness to put themselves out there, and a demonstrably higher intent to start a relationship in the near future.
It's all about that safety net.
Yes. And practically speaking, when the researchers checked back in with those exact same people 6 months later, the higher earners were statistically far more likely to have actually successfully entered into a relationship.
It makes complete logical sense when you strip away the romance and look at it structurally. Modern dating is becoming less like a Disney fairy tale and much more like a corporate merger.
A corporate merger. That is spot on.
It is. Think about how two companies operate when they are considering a merger. They don't sit in a boardroom, look at each other and say, we have a really great vibe together, let's merge.
No, absolutely not.
No, they deploy armies of accountants to conduct exhaustive due diligence. They look at the balance sheets, they analyze long-term liabilities, liquid assets, and cash flow stability.
Right.
Because if one company is healthy, but the other company is carrying a massive, unsustainable amount of toxic debt, merging will simply drag the healthy company into bankruptcy.
Exactly. It's a massive liability.
And people are making these exact same highly rational defensive calculations in very unstable economic conditions.
They have to.
There was a quote from a psychology professor at the University of Toronto included in that SciPost analysis that cut right to the core of this.
I remember this quote.
He noted, if you are working 80 hours a week, you aren't going to be able to enjoy a relationship. You physically and mentally will not have the time, the caloric energy, or the emotional bandwidth required to be present.
Yeah, you're just surviving at that point.
So that $106,000 threshold we talked about earlier isn't just about demanding luxury. It's about buying the time, the baseline security, and the peace of mind required to actually be a functional, supportive partner.
Viewing a relationship as a corporate merger, undergoing due diligence, is a brilliant framework. But, and this is big, but it forces us to confront a very complex, somewhat uncomfortable intersection.
Okay, let's get uncomfortable.
We've established this massive six-figure expectation floating out there is the new societal standard for stability, right?
Right.
But does that baseline apply to everyone equally across the board? Or do historical, deeply ingrained gender roles still dictate who is actually expected to bring that capital to the merger?
That is the million-dollar question. And the data on this is incredibly clear. And it serves as a fascinating contradiction to the prevailing narrative that we live in this completely modernized, post-gender, egalitarian society.
Spoiler alert, we do not.
We really do not. The financial expectations are still intensely gendered. When surveyed, men, on average, expect a potential partner to earn about $90,000.
Okay, 90,000.
But women, on average, expect a potential partner to earn $110,000.
So a $20,000 premium on the male partner.
Exactly. And this psychological expectation maps perfectly onto broader, real-world societal realities. According to Pew Research, in roughly 2/3 of all married or cohabiting couples in the U.S., men remain the primary earners.
2/3.
And when you poll the public at large, society still overwhelmingly values men primarily in the role of the financial provider.
Yeah, and we see this lingering adherence to traditional scripts play out immediately in the logistics of early dating, too.
Who's picking up the check?
Exactly. When we look at who is actually funding these initial encounters, 71% of men report that they expect to pay for everything on the early dates.
71%. That's a huge majority.
Right. On the flip side, 52% of women expect to split the bill. So there is this clear behavioral echo of historical norms going on.
Right.
But this is where the behavioral science gets incredibly layered and contentious. To understand what is actually driving these preferences, We need to look at bioecological exchange theory.
Bioecological exchange theory.
Yeah, and then contrast it with a recent, highly innovative virtual society experiment covered by SciPost.
Okay, before we dive into the experiment, let's lay the groundwork. What exactly does bioecological exchange theory argue in this context?
Good question. It essentially argues that human mating preferences are not strictly hardwired by ancient evolution.
Okay, so it's not caveman brain.
Right, it's not just caveman brain. Instead, those preferences are highly adaptive responses to our immediate socioeconomic environments. The theory suggests that historically, women preferred male providers, not because of some inescapable biological imperative, but because society structurally locked women out of acquiring their own wealth and resources.
Because they literally couldn't own property or hold certain jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, the only way a woman could secure resources for herself and her offspring was to strategically exchange her reproductive and social value for a man's economic value.
Okay, that makes sense.
The core premise of the theory is that if you change the environment, if you remove the structural inequality, the mating preferences will automatically shift because the fundamental need driving the preference has disappeared.
Which leads us perfectly into the virtual society experiment, because this research attempted to test that exact premise, and the methodology blew my mind.
It really is a fascinating study.
Yeah.
The researchers knew they couldn't test this perfectly in the real world because the real world is still full of historical baggage and wage gaps.
Right.
So they created a highly controlled simulation. Participants were placed into a virtual society and arbitrarily assigned specific levels of personal wealth, status, and resources. Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
They were then asked to rank the physical, social, and financial traits they most desired in a potential partner within this virtual world.
Okay.
Now, in normal real-world conditions, the concept of mating up, which is the sociological term for seeking a partner who is significantly better off financially than you are, is heavily skewed, with women engaging in it far more often than men.
Because of that structural history we just talked about.
Right, but the researchers manipulated the virtual environment. In scenarios where women were artificially given vastly more economic power and resources than the men in the simulation, their desire for a wealthy partner, their drive to mate up, dropped significantly.
Wow.
In fact, in the environments where female wealth was dominant, the traditional, well-documented differences between what men and women prioritize in a partner practically vanished.
The implication being that when women did not structurally need the money for their basic survival or stability, their brains stopped prioritizing it as a mandatory treat in a mate.
Precisely. The researchers concluded that humans are highly strategic, environmentally sensitive creatures. We subconsciously adjust our mate preferences based on the immediate conditions of our environment and how desperately we actually need external resources to thrive.
That's amazing.
The takeaway from the virtual society simulation is that the traditional gender differences in mate selection aren't deeply, permanently hardwired into our evolutionary code. They are highly sensitive to immediate economic conditions.
So if things are equal, preferences are equal.
Right. The moment the environment genuinely favors female economic power, the overwhelming demand for a traditional male provider just evaporates.
You know, I find that conclusion incredibly optimistic.
Yeah, it feels like progress.
It does, but I am going to have to forcefully push back against it using a different set of data.
Bring it on.
Because we review the institutional knowledge study from SMU Southern Methodist University, which looked at these exact same evolutionary psychology concepts, but they used a vastly different and arguably more realistic psychological methodology.
And they got very different results.
Very different. Because the SMU study showed that even when women make significantly more money in the real world, they still overwhelmingly prioritize high social and financial status in a mate.
They did. And the difference in how they extracted that data is the key.
Exactly. The SMU researchers didn't just ask people what they wanted in a vacuum, because people often lie or they don't actually know what they want until they were forced to choose.
Right. Stated preference versus revealed preference.
Yes. Instead, they used what is known in psychology as a budget allocation paradigm.
Sounds complicated.
It's basically a trade-off game. They gave participants a constrained budget of theoretical points to build their ideal mate.
Oh, like a video game character creation screen.
Exactly like that. Imagine you have 20 points, and you have to distribute them across traits like physical attractiveness, kindness, humor, and wealth.
Okay.
The researchers found that when they forced participants to make hard trade-offs, meaning if you want your partner to be exceptionally wealthy, you have to accept that they might be less physically attractive or less emotionally available. The results were striking.
What did they find?
They found that even when women possess high status themselves, even when they have extremely high mate value and abundant independent resources, they still allocate a massive portion of their limited budget to ensure their partner has high social and financial status.
Wow, even when they don't objectively need the money.
Even when they don't need it. Noting that if you don't force people to make painful trade-offs with limited resources, you don't discover their true baseline evolutionary priorities.
That makes a lot of sense, unfortunately.
Right. But when forced into a corner, that desire for a high-status mate persists, regardless of the woman's own bank account. Wow. So looking at the SMU data, I have to ask, are we really truly evolving past traditional gender roles when it comes to money? Or are we just repackaging them to feel more modern?
That is a harsh question.
It is, because even if a woman is a high-powered CEO making $500,000 a year, this data suggests her subconscious still expects her partner to be on that exact same level or higher.
And you have just highlighted the ultimate, most frustrating paradox of modern dating economics.
It really is a paradox.
We have two conflicting truths. The virtual society experiment demonstrates that the human brain has the capacity to shift its preferences when inequality is entirely removed in a sterile vacuum.
Right.
But the SMU budget allocation study proves that in messy, real-world, highly constrained scenarios, those historical evolutionary preferences are incredibly sticky.
They don't just wash away.
No, they don't. It suggests a deeply ingrained cognitive heuristic. For millennia, human beings sought partners who augmented their chances of survival. And for millennia, survival meant tangible resources. You can't just erase that programming in a single generation.
No, you can't.
So this leaves us with a massive practical problem.
Okay, what is it?
If raw salary expectations are this conditional and subject to this massive unresolved tug-of-war between our modern environment and our evolutionary psychology, what financial traits actually make or break a relationship in the long run?
That is the real question.
Because a successful marriage cannot just be about someone hitting that $106,000 mark on their W-2 and calling it a day.
It absolutely isn't. And frankly, this is the most encouraging, humanizing part of all the sources we reviewed.
Thank goodness for some good news.
Right. While the headlines focus on the six-figure entry fee, there is a massive underlying shift happening in how people evaluate long-term viability. Daters are moving away from evaluating a partner's raw net worth and shifting heavily toward evaluating their financial character.
Financial character, I like that phrase.
It's so much more important. The BMO survey we discussed earlier didn't just track inflation, it also outlined the top financial green flags that people actively look for in a serious partner.
Okay.
And crucially, none of the top green flags have anything to do with achieving a specific salary bracket.
Really? None of them?
None of them. 94% of respondents stated that a general sense of financial responsibility is a top attractive trait.
Just being responsible.
Yeah. 90% are actively looking for a partner who has a coherent, realistic financial plan for their future. And 89% simply want someone who is willing to talk openly and honestly about money without getting defensive.
Just communication. And when you flip the metric and look at the deal breakers, the absolute red flags that will terminate a relationship, they're entirely behavioral too.
Yeah, okay. What are the red flags?
The things that destroy modern romances aren't a sudden lack of income. It is a lack of financial integrity.
Integrity, yes.
24% of people surveyed explicitly stated that not telling the truth about money, hiding debts or lying about assets is an immediate deal breaker.
As it should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
30% will unilaterally end a relationship over constant borrowing or living beyond one's means.
The keeping up with the Joneses complex.
Right. And 27% point to general financial irresponsibility, like ignoring bills or making reckless impulsive purchases as the reason they would walk away.
We really need to talk about the fallout of those red flags because the collateral damage is significant.
Oh, it's huge.
According to the Talker Research Survey, 15% of all respondents across all age groups have broken up with someone specifically over financial behavior.
15% is a lot of breakups.
It is, but if you isolate the data and look strictly at Gen Z, that number jumps to a staggering 25%.
A quarter of Gen Z.
1 in 4 Gen Z daters has actively ended a relationship over money.
Wow.
But again, to your point, it is the poor financial management, the hidden credit card debt, and the lack of transparency that kills the romance, not the size of the paycheck itself.
Right. The data actually proves this out in daily measurable behavior.
How so?
The BMO index found a fascinating correlation. Couples who practice financial honesty with each other actually spend less money on their average dates.
Really? That's counterintuitive.
You'd think so, but the data shows that honest, communicative couples spend about $182 on a date, while couples who avoid the topic of money or actively hide their financial reality from each other spend nearly $195.
So lying is literally more expensive.
Transparency actually reduces the financial burden of the relationship, likely because neither partner feels the persistent, exhausting need to perform.
To put on a show.
Exactly. To show off, or to maintain a costly, unsustainable charade of wealth.
I was reading through a Reddit thread in the Fluent in Finance community while prepping for this deep dive, and a user posted an insight that perfectly illustrates this dynamic.
What did they say?
They were discussing how society constantly confuses a high salary with a good partner, and they made this incredibly brilliant analogy comparing financial wealth directly to physical beauty.
Interesting.
They argued that a high salary is exactly like physical attractiveness. It is great to have, it instantly catches your eye across a crowded room, and it makes the initial stages of dating very easy.
Right, gets your foot in the door.
Exactly. But just like physical beauty, a high salary can fade in an absolute instant if misfortune hits.
Yeah.
A sudden layoff, a catastrophic medical emergency, a severe market crash, and that wealth is gone.
Just gone overnight.
But financial responsibility, adaptability, and resilience, the way a person actually behaves when money is suddenly tight, that represents true desirability.
There's a great distinction.
Right. If a person suffers a major financial setback, what is their character reflex? Do they panic, lie to you, and secretly take out high-interest loans?
Or hide the Amazon boxes.
Exactly. Or do they sit down at the kitchen table, communicate clearly, restructure the household budget, and adapt to the new reality?
Right.
What people really deeply want is a partner who's desirable in the trenches. The true measure of a mate isn't what they buy you when times are good. It's what they do when the chips are completely down.
That is a phenomenal distinction. The difference between surface-level attractiveness and trench-level desirability applied directly to a bank account.
Exactly.
And it is a vital distinction for everyone to make, because once you have successfully vetted a partner's financial green flags, once you've committed to this person precisely because they are resilient, honest, and responsible, you inevitably reach the ultimate, final financial merger.
Cohabitation and marriage.
Cohabitation and marriage. And the current high inflation economy is radically changing how we handle and afford those traditional milestones too.
The costs of commitment. This is where the concept of pragmatic foundationalism that we talked about earlier ceases to be an academic theory and gets very, very real.
Yeah, the rubber really meets the road here.
Let's look at the baseline survival aspect of cohabitation first. The BMO index revealed a truly jarring economic statistic regarding couples who live together.
Okay.
58% of people currently in serious relationships report that they are now financially dependent on their partner to maintain their basic standard of living.
58%.
And that number is up from 40% just 1 year prior.
Wait, that is an 18% jump in financial dependency in a single 12-month period.
Yes.
That is a massive macroeconomic indicator. It speaks to a phenomenon that sociologists are starting to call forced collaboration.
Forced collaboration,
Okay.
because they have no other choice.
Because of the rapidly rising cost of living, skyrocketing rental markets, and real wages that have remained largely stagnant against inflation, couples are being pushed into financial interdependency much faster and much more deeply than they likely would have chosen in a healthier, more stable economy.
They're rushing it.
They are signing leases and moving in together, not simply because they are madly, unconditionally in love and ready for the next step, but because they literally, mathematically cannot afford to pay two separate rent payments in the same city.
They're prematurely merging their finances as a defensive bulwark against inflation.
Exactly.
And if a couple manages to survive the stress test of forced collaboration and cohabitation, they eventually face the ultimate financial boss fight.
Oh, no.
The modern wedding industry.
Yes, the boss fight.
Which operates as a completely different, highly inflated beast.
It really does. We reviewed the 2026 Real Wedding Study published by The Knot, and the data shows exactly how brutal economic pragmatism is colliding head-on with the traditional, culturally mandated fairy tale wedding.
People still want the fairy tale, though.
They do. Despite all the financial pressure we've discussed, couples still desperately want to celebrate their union. 84% of respondents stated they were looking forward to their wedding day more than any other event that year.
Right.
But the reality of actually funding a modern wedding is incredibly harsh. 41% of couples end up going significantly over their initial planned budget.
It's so easy to do with weddings.
And here is the most telling metric of all. 52%, over half of all couples getting married, rely on their parents or family to pay for the majority of the wedding expenses.
Over half.
The couples themselves, despite working full-time, simply do not have the accumulated capital to host a traditional celebration.
But because they lack the capital, they're finding fascinating, highly disruptive ways to adapt to the market.
They are.
And the most glaring, measurable example of this adaptation is what is happening right now with engagement rings.
Oh, this stat is incredible.
The Knot study highlighted the absolute undeniable takeover of lab-grown diamonds.
Yeah.
Lab-grown stones now account for a staggering 61% of all engagement ring center stone purchases.
61%. That's the majority of the market.
It is. And that represents a 239% increase in market share since 2020.
239%.
Yes. And the raw math behind why this shift is happening is incredibly obvious. By choosing a lab-grown diamond, couples are actually getting a significantly larger average carat size. The average has pushed up to 1.9 carats. But the average overall cost of the ring has plummeted to roughly $4,600.
Which is still a lot of money, but compared to a natural diamond.
Exactly.
The shift toward lab-grown diamonds is the absolute perfect distillation of a modern couple's overarching economic strategy.
Oh, so?
They still deeply desire the cultural symbol of commitment. They still want the traditional aesthetic of a large, clear stone. But they flat out refuse to pay the historically inflated artificial markup of a mined diamond when a scientifically, chemically, and optically identical alternative exists for a fraction of the cost.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here and ask, is this really a triumph of consumer choice? Or is this the ultimate proof that modern couples are simply being forced to trade down on symbolic luxuries just to afford the brutal, everyday reality of life together?
That's a fair question.
Right. Like, are we happily giving up the rare mined diamond because we are so technologically progressive? Or are we giving it up because we know deep down that we absolutely need that extra $5,000 to cover groceries, car payments, and rent for the next 6 months?
It's a bit of both, honestly.
It feels a bit less like a victory for science and a bit more like a necessary, painful concession to a punishing economy.
I think the reality encompasses both. It is undoubtedly a concession to a harsh economic reality, but it is simultaneously a fundamental redefinition of what holds value.
Yeah.
Millennials and Gen Z are looking at a mined diamond, looking at their bank accounts, and asking a very pragmatic question. Does owning a stone pulled from the earth actually bring me more day-to-day security, happiness, or relationship stability than having $5,000 of liquid cash in an emergency fund?
And the answer is clearly no.
The resounding collective answer is no. It is pragmatic foundationalism in action.
Right.
However, while it is easy for us to quantify the financial drain of expensive dates, skyrocketing rent, and engagement rings, all of our sources point to a secondary, perhaps much more insidious and damaging type of inflation happening right alongside the financial one.
This is the part of the depth dive that really gave me pause and forced me to reevaluate how I view modern stress.
Yeah.
Because while it's clear the financial drain is severe and measurable, we have to talk about the emotional counterpart. We have to talk about relational inflation.
Relational inflation.
This is a brilliant concept coined by relationship expert Daniel Dashnaw, and it deals directly with the escalating emotional cost of sustaining love today.
Right. Relational inflation is the growing, pervasive sense that love, intimacy, and partnership now demand disproportionately high, almost unsustainable levels of emotional labor, psychological availability, and raw time.
Yes.
Dashnaw points out a crucial reality. It isn't just mathematically harder to meet someone today, it is significantly harder to keep someone.
Because the bar is so much higher.
Exactly. And that is because the baseline standard for what a relationship is supposed to provide has skyrocketed. We now expect our romantic partners to be our absolute best friends, our financial equals, our informal therapists, our career coaches, and our co-managers of a highly complex, fast-paced modern life.
That is way too many jobs for one person.
It is. Everything in a modern relationship, from the intense nuance required to decode a text message to the exhausting logistical gymnastics of cohabiting and managing dual careers, requires infinitely more psychological bandwidth than previous generations ever expected from a marriage.
And you absolutely cannot separate the baseline financial instability from this widespread emotional exhaustion.
No, they are completely intertwined.
They feed each other in a vicious closed loop. There is a deeply illuminating study from the International Journal of Indian Psychology, the IGIP, that explicitly connects financial stability directly to the quality of relationship dynamics.
Okay, what's the connection?
When a couple's finances are unstable, it acts as a massive chemical accelerant for distrust, frustration, and deep existential anxiety. The study shows that couples facing mounting debt or chronic financial strain report much higher levels of marital discontent.
Which is pretty intuitive.
It is, but the mechanics of this are straightforward yet profound. When you are constantly stressed about money, your body is flooded with cortisol.
Right, the stress hormone.
Exactly. The stress of arguing about money management or the division of domestic labor leads directly to diminished physical intimacy and eventual emotional disengagement.
Because you're in survival mode.
Yes, think about your own life for a second. When you are genuinely terrified about making rent or paying off a massive medical bill, you simply do not have the cognitive capacity or the emotional reserves required for high-level emotional attunement with your partner.
Exactly. The cognitive load of surviving poverty or financial instability just crushes your ability to be a good partner.
It crushes it.
And the internet, acting as it always does, as a real-time sociological mirror, is processing this grim reality through dark humor.
I love how we process trauma with memes now.
It's the only way we cope. Dashnaut points to the specific memes and viral tweets that are circulating right now, and they are incredibly revealing about our collective mental state.
Like what?
People are casually joking online, saying things like, love languages are cute until you realize yours is just financial stability.
Oh, wow.
Or, he's not emotionally unavailable, he's just severely under-resourced.
That one hurts. That one really hits home.
Right. And my personal favorite, which perfectly captures the era, I can't date right now, I'm between bandwidths.
Between bandwidths. That is so painfully accurate.
These aren't just throwaway jokes. They are precise, devastating sociological observations about how drained everyone feels.
They really are. And I think this is the exact intersection where the financial reality and the emotional reality completely blur together into one indistinguishable mess. When financial stability becomes a literal love language, meaning knowing the bills are paid is the primary way you are able to feel safe, relaxed, and cared for, the lack of that stability doesn't just empty your wallet. It actively empties your emotional reserves.
Right.
If your partner is constantly borrowing money or lying about their credit card debt, those behavioral red flags we talked about earlier, it doesn't just hurt your credit score, it drains your psychological bandwidth. You eventually reach a point where you literally cannot afford the emotional maintenance required to keep the relationship afloat.
And if we loop all the way back to where we started this entire conversation, back to that staggering $189 average cost of a first date, you can clearly see why 47% of singles have just opted out of the system entirely.
Yeah, it's not just the money.
No, they don't have the disposable cash to participate, and equally importantly, they don't have the emotional bandwidth to pretend that they do.
So let's pull all of these threads together because we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at how dateflation is vastly outpacing normal economic inflation, turning the simple act of meeting someone for a drink into a luxury expense.
Yep.
We explored the K-shaped dating economy, where people are either spending hundreds of dollars to signal their wealth or spending absolutely nothing and risking the social stigma of dating.
We broke down the psychology behind the staggering $106,000 entry fee expected for true love and discussed how absolute financial stability grants dating confidence.
We navigated the complex debate between bioecological exchange theory and evolutionary psychology regarding gender roles and money.
We highlighted how financial honesty and resilience are becoming significantly more desirable than raw wealth.
And finally, we looked at how chronic financial stress is triggering relational inflation, completely draining our emotional bandwidth.
When you synthesize all of that data, it paints a very clear picture of a highly pragmatic, financially vetted, almost defensive era of romance.
Defensive is a great word for it.
The cultural narrative of the fairy tale has been forcibly replaced by the cold calculus of the spreadsheet. And that reality leaves us with a rather profound and frankly concerning trajectory for the future of human connection.
It absolutely does. And we want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder as you navigate this wild, unprecedented landscape.
Lay it on them.
If the costs of dating, mating, and the intense emotional maintenance required to keep a modern relationship alive continue to dramatically outpace average wages, does true love risk becoming a literal luxury good?
That is a chilling thought.
If you need a six-figure salary just to feel psychologically ready to date, and you need hundreds of disposable dollars to afford the baits themselves, will romance eventually be gated? Are we moving toward a society where finding a life partner, getting married, and building a family becomes a rare privilege, accessible only to the top economic earners?
It is a heavy, slightly dystopian question, but it's one that the data is absolutely forcing us to ask.
Is.
But before we sign off, we refuse to leave you with only existential dread. We want to give you a very practical, actionable way to navigate this environment.
Yes, please.
Because human connection is a fundamental need, and you shouldn't have to bankrupt yourself or drain your emotional reserves just to find it.
Exactly. That is why we are so incredibly excited to introduce you to Speed Mingle's concept.
Like them out.
If you are exhausted by the endless, expensive, algorithm-driven app dates that drain your wallet and go absolutely nowhere, you need to check them out. First, we strongly encourage you to subscribe and listen to 21st Century Dating Decoded to stay ahead of the curve on these trends.
Absolutely stay subscribed.
But more importantly, we urge you to get out of the digital grind and actually attend a Speed Mingle event in your local area. It is hands down the most efficient, cost-effective way to meet vetted, intentional singles face-to-face without having to pay that punishing dateflation tax over and over again.
And if you check their website and find that a Speed Mingle event is not currently operating in your specific city or neighborhood, don't just sit back and wait around for the dating market to fix itself.
No, take action.
Take control of your local ecosystem. You should contact Speed Mingle directly to become a host or to offer up your local business as an event venue. You can literally bring the solution to your own community and bypass the digital paywalls entirely.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the complex economics of modern love. Stay pragmatic out there. Always demand financial transparency from your partners, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for watching and listening to the Speed Mingle Network.